Hello and welcome back. This is the week 5 lecture. So this week we start on research. I've kind of warned you guys about this. That's why I wanted everybody to have research topics selected by the end of last week. So that was our big mission for week 4. If you remember, we were choosing research topics, and remember, we need to stick with these topics throughout the remainder of the semester. So I really stress the importance of selecting topics that we're actually interested in and that we want to learn more about. So we did those knowledge inventories at the end of last week to kind of document what we already know about our topics and what we still need to know. So hopefully by now we have some research questions written down, some things that we would like to find the answers to, and we're going to do that through research. So the research questions and the knowledge inventory are just sort of getting us organized, getting us ready to start research. So that's what we do here in week 5. And I'm going to sort of walk you guys through some basic research strategies. And I really want everybody to spend some time looking for sources this week. Now, we're not in a huge rush to find all of our sources. If you guys have looked at the syllabus, if you've looked at our class schedule, you know that our final bibliography, which is going to contain all of our outside sources, that's not due until the end of the semester. But you might have also noticed that the first half of our bibliography, which is basically just a detailed list of our sources. We're going to talk more about that assignment later today, but the first half of the bibliography is due at the end of this week. So we need to start researching this week, and we're not just doing it passively or casually. We need to find at least 4 good sources by the end of this week. Now, that's not going to be terribly difficult if we get started early in the week and we don't have any other assignments to work on this week. We don't have a research journal. We don't have anything else to do other than the first half of the annotated bibliography. So here in part 1 of the week 5 lecture, we're going to talk about research in pretty general terms. I'm going to start by talking about the acceptable types of sources that we're going to be using in this class, and then I'm going to kind of walk you guys through some basic research methods, including the library databases. I want to show you guys how to access those and how to do some simple searches inside EBSCO, which is our most commonly used database through the GBC library. So that's a great resource that everybody needs to use. But I'll also share some other resources, some other ways to find good sources. So that will be part 1. And then in part 2 of the week 5 lecture, we will start discussing the bibliography, what it is, how we do it. And I'll make sure to get you guys ready to start working on that because, again, the first half of that assignment consisting of 4 sources that you find individually that will be due at the end of the week. So let's just jump in and talk about the types of sources that we're going to be using in this class. So you guys probably understand that by now that research is a big part of this class. Obviously, we are working our way toward the big final research paper, and you guys have already selected topics for that research paper, and we're going to be working with those topics, like I've said, for the rest of this semester. So we're going to be researching the topics. Later, we're going to start writing about the topics, and obviously our writing will culminate in that research paper. But before we can do a lot of writing, we just need to learn more about our topics. We need to become very knowledgeable about our topics. Remember ethos when we were talking about the types of artistic appeals that we will eventually make as we start to make our own arguments later in the semester. A big part of that is having good credibility. And remember, credibility is based on goodwill and knowledge. A big part of that battle is proving to our audience that we know what we're talking about. We've done our homework, we've done a lot of reading, and we've learned about our topics extensively. So that's what research will allow us to start to do. here in week 5. We'll start learning, we're gathering information, but eventually we'll need to get a little bit more focused in our research, and we'll need to start looking for books and articles and maybe even websites that can really help us and provide evidence that we can use on the future research paper. So the research is ongoing. We're going to be doing it throughout the semester, but I want us to get a good start here in week 5. So what are we looking for? Well, obviously, we're looking for books, we're looking for articles, but there's different types of articles that we'll be talking about today. And we can also use websites. These are all acceptable secondary sources that we can use for our research paper. So a secondary source is typically an article or a book or a website written about some major topic, written about an event or a trend or a problem or some kind of, social development that people are talking about or debating about. So most of our sources are going to be secondary sources, which means that basically it's people writing about something that happened or something that is happening. Those are the most common types of sources to use on a research project. But there's also such a thing called a primary source. And that's sort of like we're creating the data ourselves. So we can create our own primary sources. Those are more like first-hand accounts, more direct knowledge or information about an event or about a problem or about an issue that we're really generating ourselves. So a lot of what we're going to find through our research will be stuff about other people's primary sources, right? We might read about eyewitness accounts, but those eyewitness accounts might be collected by a journalist and put in an article that's a secondary source. Or we might be reading other people's interviews. But we're kind of at a second or third hand remove from a lot of that stuff when we encounter it in books and articles. But we can conduct interviews of our own. We can also use first-hand experiences if those are available to us when we're talking about our topics, and that could count as a primary source, like an eyewitness account, or maybe we've experienced something that we can bring an example or an anecdote that we can provide. Most of the anecdotes we're going to find, most of our examples that we're going to use in our papers, we're going to find those in other people's articles or books. But we might also be able to generate some of them of our own. We can also conduct our own surveys or polls, and we can use that data. Those are primary sources, and some of us will be able to engage in some of that depending on how close we are, how connected we are to our topics. But for the most part, most of our sources will be secondary sources, and that's fine. Another key distinction that you need to understand, and all of this is in the Week 5 overview, you need to know the difference between scholarly or academic sources on one hand and what we call popular sources on the other. You guys are going to notice the difference between these kinds of sources, and in fact, you should have already noticed the basic differences last week when you were looking through those sample articles that I posted to Canvas. Scholarly or academic articles are the best kinds of sources to use. They are what we call peer-reviewed sources. And we like these the best for pretty obvious reasons. Typically, these types of sources are written by experts in the field. Doctors, scientists, maybe college professors, people who have a lot of knowledge. Obviously, they have a lot of credibility, and they're often using a lot of evidence. They've conducted extensive research of their own. Maybe they've generated some primary data, from doing studies, conducting surveys or interviews. Maybe they've also simply read widely, and they're consulting other people who have done that work. Think back to James Surowiecki, if you remember his TED Talk or that essay of his that we looked at weeks ago. He's consulting all of these other sources. He's mentioning all of these other authors and the studies that they've done and the work they've done. So he's using that sort of as testimonials, right? He's bringing in expert opinions. He's bringing in some numerical evidence. So he's done his research. That's what we are doing as well. But we like those scholarly sources, the peer-reviewed sources, because they're jam-packed with good info and good evidence. We also call these sources peer-reviewed. And that's another big reason why we like them. So let's say I, as a college professor, as somebody who might publish in a scholarly journal about literature, for example, because that's my background, if I'm going to write an article for a scholarly journal, I submit that article, and before it gets published, it has to be reviewed. It has to be basically double checked by other experts in the field, other English professors, other people who know a lot about this particular area. And they're going to read my article and make sure that it's good. They're going to make sure that it's accurate. They're going to make sure that I'm citing my sources, that I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary. So